I've been in revenue cycle for 25 plus years. Actually started as an insurance AR collector.
So worked all the way up through the organization, had multiple different roles. But I've always had this real fascination with technology and how we can bring technology to the rev cycle. Everybody kind of realizes that healthcare business is pretty far behind some of the other industries in the world in terms of technology adoption. And I've always been interested in what we can do new in bringing that forward. So back when I was with Tenet a long time ago, we created microsegmentation, which was using some predictive analytics, which I'll talk a little bit about today, in order to be more efficient in operations. Back in 2014, I actually started my own company to provide predictive analytics out to the industry. So it's been a hobby of mine, and this whole kind of concept of AI, which I'll kind of talk about what is AI and what isn't AI, is really fascinating to me. But bringing it back, I have experienced the value from some of these processes and technologies in the organization. So I want to share some of that with you today. Hopefully, give you some kind of real examples that you can go out. If you're not already doing some of these things that we talk about today, you can jump right on and do them. You can do some of these yourselves. You can look for partners for some of these, but there's real value that you can find in the rev cycle today. So just a quick few seconds about Meduit. We are one of the largest independent revenue cycle management vendors. We do have a national footprint. We're not owned by any large health system. And we have quite a broad support throughout the industry of 800 plus hospitals and tens of thousands of physicians and well over 1,000 employees in the organization. Meduit provides end-to-end services, which I'm not really here to talk about, but just wanted to give you kind of the picture of our background of kind of knowing every aspect of the revenue cycle. All right, so let's dive into the topic for today. COVID has been around for almost a year now, if you can believe that, how much time has flown by. But, I want you guys to think back about, the challenges that faced revenue cycle operations before COVID. There were always regional or local things that would pop up. You might have floods in a particular region, or you might have fires out, in the West or something like that create this business risk for you that disrupt your operations. In rev cycle, it's all about cash flow, right? You got to get the claims going out the door. You got to get the cash coming in the door in order for the hospital or the physician organization to stay afloat and keep providing that care to the community. So that continuity of business has always been important. And, COVID is kind of the first, I would almost call it like a national disaster, right? So this is, something that has affected everybody more or less equally across the country, right? You have lost staff in the offices, whether you've been able to telecommute those and send them home, or whether you've just had attrition that you can't backfill because people can't work remote, things like that. But I think the silver lining of this is that it's going to change the thinking in the rev cycle industry. It's going to change the way that we think about how we run our day-to-day operations and open our minds to more telecommuting, more flexibility in our processes, and what other technology and things that we can bring in order to maintain that. The way we operate rev cycle businesses is going to be different. And even once everybody's vaccinated and COVID isn't an issue anymore, we are still going to run rev cycle a little bit differently than we did before, and that is really actually a good thing for this. I have a quote from a CEO of a large health system that said, "None of us would have chosen to be in this COVID-19 storm and experiencing this level of disruption, but we must adapt. We're making very difficult decisions that will reshape our organization going forward." So I think, the pandemic kind of set the table for AI, artificial intelligence, or automation, advanced automation, to transform the revenue cycle. I think now there's more pressure than ever to make these changes. Change might be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's important to look at what are those opportunities. There's no silver bullet. There's no like magic box that you can go and purchase it and everything's going to be peachy keen in your rev cycle and work perfectly. Everybody has different, technologies. We all have different patient accounting systems. We've customized them differently. We have different workflows. We have different processes. Our local payers behave differently. Everybody's national payers are one thing, but you've got your local regional payers that all have their own unique way of doing things. It all has to be understood in order to really leverage that technology. And we'll get into a little bit of how that can work a little bit later in the webinar today. So remote work is one of the continuity things that everybody has been looking at, and we did it by necessity 10 months ago when we first had to start sending people home because of COVID risk. But I think it's evolving, and you should look at remote work as a future long-term strategy, and that means looking at the technology platform to manage those employees, right? So it's great for employees to be able to work from home, but from a business perspective, we need to maintain the productivity. We have to have the same level of output from those workers that we do as if they were sitting in an office. So there's pieces of technology, and there are some things out there, not specific to healthcare, but specific to remote work that let you kind of monitor and assist employees. The other aspect of remote work that I think is a challenge is training. So in an office environment, it's really easy for a lead or a tenured person to lean around the cubicle wall and say, oh, here's how you handle this, and transfer knowledge kind of person to person. It's obviously a lot more difficult when people are remote. So if you've got things like Teams or Zoom or any other kind of instant messaging or things like that, definitely adopt that and make sure that those are integrated into that process. The other, opportunity to address the challenges with staffing is looking at outsourcing and looking at potentially outsourcing things that you didn't historically do. That's not really a new concept in the industry. People have outsourced for decades, but you may want to look at just supplementing. And again, it's not necessarily about trying to reduce staff or cost. It's about that business continuity, right? If there's a segment of your AR or segment of your business process that is at risk because you can't find enough people to do it, or the productivity isn't what it needs to be, look at an outsource partner or an overflow partner to take up some of the slack if you're falling short. So that's not new, but that's the other aspect of addressing COVID. So let's talk about artificial intelligence. I think we're at an inflection point in the industry where people are more open to adopting new technology. But I want to talk about like AI. AI is like a marketing buzzword, and even back in late 2019, which was kind of really the last industry conferences that we had, thinking about Becker's and ANI running in 2019. AI was all over the place, right? So everybody's talking about AI. And I think, as business leaders, you should understand kind of what that means. Yes, people are going to market and talk up their processes, but what's really under the covers? What are we talking about when we talk about AI? So there's a bunch of different technologies that have been kind of lumped into this from a marketing perspective. They're all valuable, right? So just because somebody calls something AI and it may not be true artificial intelligence like science fiction, but it's still value add and advanced technology for the industry. So don't be scared off by AI as a buzzword, but look at what is actually happening underneath the covers there and understand that. So in terms of what is artificial intelligence, there's really kind of 4 categories, I guess I would say, of technology. The first one is regression analytics, and this has been around for decades. Primarily things like scoring, segmentation to understand like propensity to pay, potentially, charity scoring and things like that. So this is really what you would think of as scoring. The easiest example, if you're not familiar with any of these, is thinking about a credit score, right? A FICO score. So that uses past behavior of consumers to predict their future behavior of whether they're going to pay a bill if somebody extends them credit, right? So a credit score is something that looks at history of a population and then applies that going forward. In revenue cycle, like I said, that's really more around propensity to pay, scoring, and that's actually been around for since the 2000s. It started off with external vendors that would provide this. A lot of organizations are able to do that kind of scoring in-house now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. So that's regression analytics. The second category is robotic process automation. So this is essentially like a macro on steroids. So we've had scripting for mass data entry into mainframe systems, in our old school patient accounting systems for decades, right? So that part isn't new, but the platforms available now for robotic process automation are really robust, and they actually allow information to be entered in screens and applications to access across multiple platforms, right? So if you've got a patient accounting system that runs over Citrix, and you've got a medical record system, and you've got payer websites, and you've got use Excel, or whatever the tools that a person uses on their computer, the new world of robotic process automation technologies can do any of that, and they can automate any of that. There's some big names in the industry, UiPath, Automation Anywhere, Blue Prism. You probably have heard of some of these. These are platforms that you can build this automation on. And they're really much more advanced than that old script that somebody in the IT department would run to post transactions or post adjustments or whatever it is that you were trying to automate. This really makes it interesting because you can actually now replicate what regular employees do and interact with all of the different systems in your organization. So that's robotic process automation. That's a good foundational tool to drive automation. The area where I think we're at in rev cycle right now is supervised machine learning. So this is training over time, right? So you want to teach an automation the right way to do something. Think of it like a child growing up to adulthood, right? They're constantly learning, they're constantly having that positive or negative reinforcement about what they should and shouldn't do, and they continue to grow and learn over time. And so when you think about supervised machine learning, it's essentially the same thing. It's using those inputs to teach that automation the way that you want it to work. And I think, we'll talk a little bit about some examples in a second, but I think that's kind of where we're at in rev cycle right now, which is really awesome. Because, there's a lot of knowledge in the heads of our seasoned rev cycle employees. They know how to work these accounts. They know how to solve these problems with the payers. They know how to, get something accomplished, but a lot of that is in people's heads, right? So if you can apply a technology like supervised machine learning, you start to draw that knowledge out of people who've done it for 10 or 20 years and know how to fix stuff. And those are the interesting things, that we can look at in terms of automation. The last kind of category here under AI is unsupervised machine learning. And this is a little bit more of kind of the science fiction-y thing where you just throw a robot at something and it just figures out what it needs to do without anybody telling it what to do. I really don't think that the rev cycle industry will ever get to that point, and probably for good reason, right? So we've got tremendous regulatory and compliance oversight. If you threw an unsupervised robot at a problem, it may start changing codes on claims. Like, oh, if I change this code, I can get this, the claim will get paid. Well, great, but now you're was that code appropriate? So you have to think about, the constraint in our industry on that. So, I don't know that we're ever going to get to like true artificial intelligence where we just have robots figuring everything out without any input. I really think that supervised machine learning is kind of the way of the future where, we can apply those regulatory compliance, best practice, teachings into the automation so that it knows what to do. All right, so I think all this is getting interesting. We'll definitely get into some examples here in a second. Cost and performance pressures are really nothing new. COVID is kind of like trying to run RevCycle with our hands tied behind our back, because we have all these additional kind of barriers to success that have been thrown at us. Whether that's people or whether it's something simple like not being able to have a brainstorming session in a conference room to like figure stuff out. So I think we got to look at what are the technologies that are available now, and what can we do. We're kind of behind other industries in terms of automation. You look at like Amazon's and Apple, whatever. They're doing crazy advanced technology stuff. And why is that hard in healthcare? Why haven't we adopted some of these, awesome technologies that are out in the world? And I think this really comes back to the level of complexity. I mean, it seems like a simple thing to send a claim to an insurance company and to get a payment and to clear an account, right? So, but there's so much, complexity hidden in those processes. And the business rules are constantly changing. Back one of the sessions I was at Becker's in 2019, one of the speakers had said that they were tracking payer provider manual updates nationally, and that there were over 100,000 payer manual changes in a year. So that's just a crazy amount of change to try to keep up with. And obviously not every hospital or health system has every payer in the country, so it's not necessarily that much. But you think about your top 5 payers. How often are they changing rules? Especially some of those commercial like Blue Crosses and United Healthcares of the world. They're constantly tweaking their what you're supposed to do in order to get your claim paid. In order to give them the advantage. So as RevCycle people, we have to balance that and try to adapt along that and stay up to speed with all those changes. There's exceptions to the rules, there's exceptions to the exceptions. So I think the reason we haven't had a significant technology leap forward in RevCycle is just because this level of complexity has been hard to handle. But I think we're getting there. I think there are some tangible things where these technologies, these AI group of technologies are going to make a difference. So there's a few key areas I'll talk about and give some examples of each of these. Autonomous coding, speech analytics, automating some functions, and then predicting some outcomes. So we'll start with clinical coding. People saw CAC 10 years ago and thought, oh, wow, this is going to change the way that we do HIM and change coding. And it really didn't. I mean, it was helpful, right? It maybe accelerated a little bit of productivity, but at the end of the day with CAC, it was just really a recommendation. And then you still had to have a coder go through that and say, I agree or disagree and validate that in order to move forward. But some of the newest technology that's out on the market, and these are things that you could go out and find today, are actual full end-to-end coding. And obviously these are going to be more of the like ED claims and simple claims. But think about the volumes in your organization of those types of activities. So the new technology is actually able to go through, understand, with the clinical language and understanding engine to read progress notes or medical records, and build the procedure and diagnosis codes for that claim. And it can create a thorough audit trail, right? So it actually goes and it'll document, exactly where it found a specific piece of language and how that translated to a specific code that is used. And so these are really great technologies. It's really great technology for high volume organizations. And again, when we think about, and I'll talk a little bit more about this on some other topics, but when we think about resources in an organization, we want to optimize the people that we have. So, whether or not you've lost net total staff because of COVID, you have skilled employees, and what you want those employees to be doing is thinking about problem solving, the complicated stuff, the difficult things that you really need a human mind in order to solve and move forward. What you don't want to have your staff doing is stuff that is the same, clicking the same buttons over and over again. It's very low cognitive reasoning required in order to get that done. It's busy work, right? So that's the kind of stuff that is kind of consumed, part of the industry. And we've done our best to balance this, but I think that we as rev cycle leaders need to think about, how do I take the people that I've got and how do I make them more valuable to the organization? And part of that is shifting some of this low complexity, high volume work to automation. So, looking at autonomous coding for ED or some outpatient, service lines, I think is one of those things that allows you to take the rest of your coders and move them back to the more complex stuff. And again, you're working on elevating people over time. Voice analytics is another area. This is really kind of specific to patient calls. But the technologies that are out there really can actually listen to the words and the tone that are used by patients. And a lot of organizations are really focused on patient satisfaction. You've got your HCAP scores, and the business part of that is one small piece. But from an organization, and I've lived this in the past, you can have a great clinical experience, and then if somebody in the billing office just irritates the heck out of that patient, they're going to give a bad score to the organization. They're going to get a negative referral and negative word of mouth, and all of that is bad. So, managing patient satisfaction within rev cycle specific to questions about people's bills, or did you bill my insurance, or can I, make a payment on my, on my balance, whatever that is, the organization wants to be able to say that they're providing that great service. So again, you could have a QA team, you could record all your phone calls, or your vendor could record all their phone calls, and they could have a team of people that sit and listen to those after the fact and run through a scorecard and say, oh, did they, was the rep professional on the phone? Was the patient upset? How did that call go? And score that. But that's time consuming, right? You need resources to manually listen to that and manually make a decision. So if you look at a voice analytics platform, it can do all of this with automation, right? It can evaluate the tone and the friendliness, I guess, of the call as it listens to it, and create a score. And again, that can shift some of that resource work, so you don't need to have people manually QAing calls. You can use this technology. And I know a lot of organizations outsource their patient call center activity, but this is something that you should ask your vendors. If you've got your early out work outsourced, is that vendor doing what they need to do to track your organizational patient satisfaction using this technology? So again, another piece of technology that's available widely that can be employed to shift resources back to other problem solving things. So the next two examples are really kind of a mix of robotic process automation and supervised machine learning. These are high volume processes that we all see in our organizations, and they're good candidates to apply this new kind of level of technology to. So the first is really dealing with authorizations. You can look at it as from both sides, right? So you could look at it as I'm a health system and I generate a lot of referrals because I'm a primary care and I need to automate creating authorization requests for my patients to go get, MRIs or other diagnostic testing, and I have a high volume of those requests. So that's one kind of side of the picture where you're initiating the authorization request. The other side is just as time consuming, is on the provider side. So if you're a health system and you've got a large radiology practice, or multiple locations, so you're getting a lot of community inflow of orders to have diagnostic tests done. You have to make sure that those authorizations are valid, right? So did they, it's the referring physician that requests it, but the service provider is on the hook for it being accurate, right? Because if the authorization was for the wrong CPT, or if they put the wrong NPI or the wrong date in the authorization, and you provide that service and the authorization ends up not being valid, then you have a denial and you have to work through trying to get that resolved. So both sides of the equation, whether you're requesting it or whether you're validating an authorization, it's very repetitive. It's a lot of logging into websites, portals, and AIMS and of the world, and looking at those authorization requests and comparing information and bringing that back into the hospital system, and just comparing that matching. So this is a perfect example of something that you could use robotic process automation and some trained learning in order to make these evaluations. So looking at the different screens and the two different applications and saying, okay, here's the referral in the payer portal, and here's what I've got entered in my patient accounting system, and do those pieces of information match? And if not, what do I do? From a process perspective, am I sending this back to the referring physician and say, you asked for the wrong authorization, or am I doing some other type? Am I triggering something to go to scheduling to say reschedule the service for another date because the authorization is not valid? Whatever those processes are in your organization, they're fairly easy to define. What are the workflow steps that need to happen? And those are the opportunities for driving automation. So the other similar aspect is automating claims follow-up. And I think we've seen companies and vendors that have provided claim statuses from portals for many years. There's some great companies out there that do that. Hopefully your organization is getting electronic claim statuses, 276, 277s. So whether you're taking that data from a transaction into your system, or whether you're using a vendor to kind of bring some of that data back into your patient accounting system, the one challenge with that is you still need to take an action. What is it that will fix that problem and get that resolved in the rev cycle? And how do you move that forward in terms of not having to manually touch that account? So yes, you saved some time by bringing that data back from the payer website. So now my employee doesn't have to go log into the portal and find the claim and read the information. It's all back in my patient accounting system. That's great. But I still need that person to look at that claim and make a decision and say, what do I do next with that? So I think this is a great opportunity where, again, we can use supervised machine learning and teach automation. What do I do when I see this code from this payer? A great example is one of the worst denial codes out, and I'm sure everybody will agree with me, is the CO16, right? That is so not helpful of a denial code, because there could be 100 different reasons why a payer denied a claim with a CO16. Did they need documents? Was there a coding issue? What is it that really is the underlying issue there? And again, this is why automating some of these responses has been challenging up until now, where we're starting to see the advent of this kind of new level of technology, because all of that information was kind of in people's heads, right? So I know it's Blue Cross, and I know when it's CO16, and I know when it's this service type. What they're really asking for is the copy of the ED report, whatever that outcome is. That's trapped in people's heads, and so we got to draw that information out in order to automate those processes. And the outcomes could be completely different. Or the actions that need to be taken could be completely different. Maybe it's something where you need to actually re-verify the eligibility because it was actually sent to the wrong claim address. So you need to go through the steps. You need to re-verify the eligibility, you need to requeue the, update an insurance plan code and requeue the claim, right? That might be one resolution. Maybe it's they needed a document. You need to log into the payer portal and you need to upload a copy of that medical record, attach it to the claim so that the claim will process. Maybe it's a coding issue and you need to transfer it to a coding work queue in your system. So there's so much variation of kind of the what if outcome, that makes it difficult, in the past for us to try to build automation on, but in the future where we have these tools where this, automation can kind of learn from watching what people are doing, I think it'll really open some doors for additional automation. The other aspect of this is, payers don't always use those codes correctly, or they take license with what the meaning of the code is in the kind of CARC definitions. In North Carolina, our Blue Cross payer here has their whole own set of denial codes that they use internally, proprietary codes, but they're very granular. They say exactly what's wrong with that claim, and essentially tell you what you need to do to fix that claim and get that paid. But when you get an EDI transaction from Blue Cross of North Carolina, they've mapped all of those into those standards, and you kind of lose some of that granularity of information. So, the other aspect of this is being able to draw out that granular information, and whether that means you're looking at remarks underneath a denial code, or whether that means you're logging into a payer portal to get their proprietary denial codes that they're not sending on a transaction. Whatever that is, those tools are available to now actually go and gather that information in order to make that decision on how to proceed with that claim. So anyways, I think this is one of the most exciting aspects of kind of where the technology is. Again, these are things that are starting to be available now in the industry. So if you're not already looking at some of these, you can look at it. And I think this is about optimizing resources. Like, if you've got a high volume claim rejection where your top payer is constantly asking for medical records, or they're constantly kicking back a specific type of denial that how to fix, you just have to make one change, send it back to them, they reprocess it. Those are the great candidates to look at for automation. This complex stuff, med denials, complex reimbursement, disagreements on a methodology of how a claim was paid, those are not great candidates for automation. But what you've done, if you apply this automation technology in your rev cycle, you've taken that busy work and automated it, and then you freed up those employees to focus on some of those more complex problem solving activities. So again, it's really about elevating the level of work within the organization. The last area that is really common, but still valuable in the industry is looking at these prediction tools. So, this is the propensity to pays, type scoring models that are available out there. So if you do your own customer service or early out collections, you absolutely should be looking at how do I optimize this, because if you've got 5 people available to make phone calls on patient balances and 50,000 accounts unpaid, you want to be able to rank order those. You want to be able to put those in the order of what's the most likely, if I call this person, what's the most likely person to pay? Because I don't have enough people in the organization to call everybody. So I have to focus that on where it's going to drive the most value. So if you do this yourself, you should be looking at an internal score. If you're using vendors, most likely they're using some sort of propensity to pay, but you can always ask that question and say, how are they optimizing that? Because if they collect more cash, then that's good for you as an organization. So that's kind of the classic, what do you do with a predictive model in rev cycle? But there's some interesting, more advanced things that we can apply that same technology to. And that is looking at like claims and payer behavior. So we can use predictive modeling to say exactly when we would expect a response from a payer on a claim. So old school rev cycle, we're going to follow up on claims 14 days after they get sent to the payer. That's the way that it's been done for years and years and years. But what if I could tell you that Blue Cross pays their claims on day 18? consistently. You'll always get that remit day 18, sometimes day 17, sometimes day 19, but it's right around day 18. Well, if you know that payer is going to pay on day 18, why would you have an employee call or go on the website on day 14? Because all they're going to say is claims in process or claims set to pay, or, here's the check number, it's on its way, whatever. And so that's really not a value add activity for that employee to do, because you could have used some data and some prediction to say, oh, well, I don't need to check on day 14 because those are always going to pay on day 18. And what you do is you can change your work queue timing so that you follow up on day 20, right? So most of those claims will have been responded to and paid by day 18, but there'll be some stragglers that didn't get a response. And those are the ones where it's valuable to pick up the phone and call and say, is there some problem with this claim? Did you not get it? Is there a denial? I haven't received the denial yet, but is there something I could fix in order to get that paid? But you've taken that bulk of follow-up activity and you've refocused it on things where you're really actually going to get value by having that employee do that work. So that's one aspect of how you can use a prediction tool in looking at payer behavior. The other one is sometimes difficult for us as rev cycle leaders to swallow, which is, if I've got a denial, what's the probability I will ever get this paid? So you could build models off of your historical denials and your appeals and your activity and whether or not you can actually get a specific denial overturned. And organizationally, you could say, I have zero chance of ever winning this denial. I'm not going to appeal it. And that's hard for some organizations to say. We tend to spend a dollar to chase a dollar, right? We will work that until it's dead because, we're right. It shouldn't have been denied. We should get paid, right? So we're going to continually, try to challenge that. But if you're resource challenged, right? If you don't have enough staff to appeal every denial, what if you just rank order them? What if you take your 1,000 denials that you received in the last month and you put them in the order of the most likely to get paid if I do an appeal to the least likely? And you work down the list and your people are working through those ones that have that high probability of payment. But if they run out of time, like if they can't get to the bottom of the list, then you're minimizing that loss to the organization. Okay, maybe I didn't get to the appeal that had a 10% chance of probability, but I definitely got to all the ones that had an 80% chance of probability of payment. So again, you're looking at, how do I optimize the resources that I have in the organization, and what are the tools that are out there that can help me do that? And again, a predictive model, the technology is not new, but applying it to the way that we operate a rev cycle, we can think about it in different ways. The other thing on the screen here is presumptive charity. And again, if you're an organization that's looking for community benefit 501R, and you're not looking at a presumptive charity scoring model, you can do that. Again, that's not really going to affect your resources, but it will help supplement that community benefit value to the organization if you're using a model like that. So those are really kind of the three areas where predictive tools are helpful in rev cycle organizations. All right, so we're getting towards kind of the end of the presentation. I'll leave a few minutes for any questions, but just want to wrap up with kind of two kind of key points here. And I've talked about some of these technologies that are available today, and I wanted to give you some help in making some decisions on moving forward. So, I think that there's a few key questions that you should ask any business partner that you're considering bringing into the organization. First of all, does that company specialize in revenue cycle? Do they understand rev cycle? There are a couple organizations selling AI to rev cycle today. Very smart people don't have a lot of understanding in rev cycle. So what happens in that scenario is that they may come into your organization physically or virtually, and say, I'm going to help you automate stuff, but you're having to explain to them what a cart code is, or you're going to have to explain to them, why we were doing an adjustment, not a rebuild. So you have to kind of teach them rev cycle, and that just takes too much time, right? So what I would say is, if you're looking at partners, look at somebody who understands rev cycle, so that you don't have to teach them rev cycle. You only have to share your workflows and your payer rules and all that kind of stuff with them in order for them to get some automation in place for you. The second question is are they offering services more broadly than just the technology automation? I think again, it's kind of a resource backing, right? So if the organization you're talking to does outsourcing and they do consulting, or they understand that if they have a question, if you've asked them to do some automation, they can internally find the resources in order to get the answer to that. They're not going to lean on you in order to try to get that information. Again, it's really about the organizational knowledge, making sure that they've got the resources behind their offering in order to actually accomplish what they're promising to accomplish. The third question I would say is how customizable is it? Every payer, every regional payer has different rules and stuff, and if the solution that you're considering is difficult or time consuming to customize, then that might not be the best solution for you. You want something that can be adapt quickly, right? So if a payer changes a rule, you want to be able to update that rule and continue on the way. You don't want to spend 6 weeks reworking a workflow because payer changed one simple rule, right? So you want to be able to have that flexibility for customization within that solution. We're all different. Everybody's got different needs, different priorities, and finding a partner that can adapt to you is going to be something that will be a value add in this process. And then, the last question is do they actually have experience? So there are a few organizations I've seen some marketing emails come across my inbox of organizations I've never heard of before in RevCycle. I've been in RevCycle for 25 years, and I know pretty much all of the companies out there that have been around. But so there's new entrants into the market, right? So they may be smart people, they may have RevCycle people, and I'm not saying don't look at them, but what I would say is, have they proven that they can do what they're saying they can do? Do they understand the process? I think back to the question of complexity in RevCycle, I think people who haven't lived RevCycle for their whole lives just can't comprehend how complex it is and how many rules there are, and how much change there is week to week in terms of processes and how you have to deal with things. So I think having that proven case experience is a valuable question to ask any particular partner. It gives you a level of confidence, right? That you're not their guinea pig, right? You don't want to be the first. Some organizations want to be the bleeding edge, right? But generally you want to know, if I'm going to pay for a service, I want to know that somebody's actually done this before and that it's going to work when they flip the switch and turn it on. So those are some of the kind of key questions that you can ask. Just circling back to MedWit. So we do have some of these solutions. Our solution we've named Sarah, a supervised autonomous revenue associate, which is just this family of automation that leverages robotic process automation and supervised machine learning in order to bring this together. And some of the things that it can do, I'm not going to read through all of these in the sake of time. I want to leave some time for some questions. But kind of back to what I was talking about, and whether you're looking at Sarah with MedWit, or you're looking at any other particular vendor in the industry, look at what it can actually do today. Can you actually do these tasks with automation successfully, right? And generate that value back to the organization. Can you re-verify insurance eligibility? Can you, process a reconsideration appeal, and send that to the payer? So ask those questions, whether it's to us or whether it's to any other vendor. Those are the things that are important to the organization and making sure that you can actually accomplish in the organization. So the last slide I have here is just kind of circle back something I mentioned a little bit ago, which is, what's the impact to the people? This is not about downsizing and laying off, massive amounts of people in the organization. This is about, reforming the way the work is done. These tools, these AI tools, aren't going to take jobs away. They're going to change what those jobs are. One of the interesting things is it'll actually decrease employee productivity. And if you think about that, it's, if my job was working AR and half the claims I saw were an easy fix, like click a couple buttons and I'm done and I'm on to the next one, it took a few seconds. Half the claims were appeals. Well, now if 100% of the things in my work queue are appeals, I'm going to actually have a lower overall daily productivity. And that's not a bad thing, right? It's about upskilling that workforce and, elevating the value of those people to the organization. So, if you're looking at bringing in the technology, I would say, talk to your staff, tell them these things that we're not trying to take your job away. We're trying to be more efficient as an organization. We absolutely need you as our key resources in the organization to be here to help us solve these problems. Maybe you're going to help, train some of this automation. But at the end of the day, we need you as RevCycle people and RevCycle experts to be successful and kind of recommit to the staff and the workforce if you're looking at any of these technologies in your organization. So that's kind of my closing comment. All right, so let's go on to some questions.
All right, Jason, the first question that came through is, my organization is now exploring opportunities with AI. Most attendees stated that they used legacy scripting. Can you explain what that is?
A scripting is like a macro, right? So it's something that only works within one application, right? So think about like adjustments. You need to post an adjustment to 1,000 accounts in your patient accounting system, right? So you're going to upload an Excel list or something, and it's going to do nothing but go through that one screen and type in that information and create the batch for the adjustments. So that's kind of what scripting used to be. The difference with robotic process automation now is that you can go across multiple applications, right? So you can log in a payer website and you can determine it was a denial, and you can apply a business rule and say this denial is an adjustment, and you can go back into the patient accounting system and you can pop up the screen and you can enter the code for that specific adjustment and move that forward. So it's a little bit more complex logic than has been available in the past.
Excellent. And then another question that came through, if a provider is just getting started with AI, what area of revenue cycle is the best place to start?
That's an excellent question. And what I would look at is, so I can answer this two ways, right? So first is volume, right? So what area do I have where I just have a significant amount of volume coming through, whether that's authorizations or whether that's eligibility verifications or whether that's outpatient AR claims. What your organization, you kind of see those bottlenecks and where that volume is kind of spiking in your organization. So that's one way to look at that. The other way that you could look at that question is where am I short-staffed? Where am I having a hard time getting people to complete their work queues? And does that provide an opportunity for automation? So it's fairly easy to spot these. We, as RevCycle leaders, we kind of know where our challenges are within the organization, and I would look at that. So the one caveat, obviously, with any kind of automation is it's not at the point where it can do phone calls, right? So you really need a process where everything is done online on the computer, whether that's in your systems or whether that's in accessing the payer portal. But in order to use the automation to really eliminate the manual effort, it can't be anything with a phone call. So those are the guidance I would give on where to look.
Great. And I think we've got a quick minute for one last question. How do I know if my organization has a process that would benefit from the Sarah family of web bots?
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of same answer, which is, again, look for that high volume. Is there anywhere where you've got 5 employees doing the same job over and over again? And if you could take those 5 employees and put them on something more valuable to the organization, is that a benefit? Is there something where if I take that daily task away, I can take those people that I've got and put them on something, doing reconsiderations with payers or doing something more complex problem solving?
Well, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us, Jason. We appreciate it.